Chapter 18 of the Story of Ancient Irish Civilization. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by TechSavvy. The Story of Ancient Irish Civilization by P. W. Joyce. Chapter 18. How Irish handicraftsmen excelled in their work. All the chief materials for the work of the various crafts were produced at home. Of wood there was no stint, and there were mines of copper, iron, lead, and possibly of tin, which were worked with intelligence and success. From the most remote times there were in Ireland professional architects or builders, as there were smiths, poets, historians, physicians, and druids, and we find them mentioned in our earliest literature. There were two main branches of the builder's profession, stone building and wood building, and although builder was supposed to be master of both. The most distinguished olive builder of a district was taken into the direct service of the king, and received from him a good yearly stipend, for which he was to oversee and have properly executed all the king's buildings and other structural works. In addition to this he was permitted to exercise his art for the general public for pay, and as he had a great name, and had plenty of time on hands, he usually made a large income. The three chief metal workers were the goba, the cade, and the sire. The goba was a smith, a blacksmith; the cade a worker in brass, gold, and silver; a brasier goldsmith or silversmith; the sire a carpenter or a mason, a worker in wood or stone. We have already seen that the ancient Irish were very skilful in metallic art. Metallic compounds were carefully and successfully studied, copper commonly forming one of the ingredients. The most general alloy was bronze, formed of copper and tin, but brass, a compound of copper and zinc, was also used. There were two kinds of bronze: red bronze, used for spearheads, cauldrons, etc., and white bronze, which was much more expensive, and used for ornamental works of art, fine metal works of all kinds. The exquisite skill of the ancient Irish brasiers is best proved by the articles they made, of which hundreds are preserved in our museums. The gracefully shaped spearheads, which, in point of artistic excellence, are fully equal to any of those found in Greece, Rome, or Egypt, were cast in moulds, and we have not only the spearheads themselves but many of the moulds, usually of stone. In one glass case in the National Museum there are more than 40 moulds for bronze axes, spearheads, arrowheads, etc., some looking as fresh as if they had been in use yesterday. The old caids were equally accomplished in making articles of hammered bronze, of which the most characteristic and important are the great trumpets (page 87 above), and the beautifully formed cauldrons (page 116). Many of admirable workmanship, made of number of bronze plates, hammered into shape and riveted together. In old times in Ireland blacksmiths were held in great estimation, and in the historical and legendary tales we find smiths entertaining kings, princes, and chiefs, and entertained by them in turn. We know that Vulcan was a Grecian god, and the ancient Irish had their smith god, Gobnu, and the Dedain, who figures in many of the old romances. The old Irish smith's anvil was something like the anvil of the present day, but not quite so large and heavy. It had the usual long snout, and was fixed firmly on a block. There were sledges and hand hammers, pincers or tongs, and a water trough. The bellows was very different from the present smith's bellows. It had two air chambers of wood and leather lying side by side and communicating with the blowing pipe. These were worked by the bellows blower, who stood with his feet on the two upper boards, and pressed them down alternately, by which the two chambers were emptied in turn into the main pipe, so as to keep up a continuous blast. It should be remarked that in private houses they used a different sort of bellows, commonly known as a blower, which was held in the lap, and worked by turning a handle. This, by means of cogwheels, caused a number of little fans in the inside to revolve rapidly, and thus to force a current through the pipe. The fuel used by metal workers was wood charcoal. The smith's furnace was made of moist clay, specially prepared, a sort of fire clay, which was renewed from time to time when needed. This furnace surrounded and confined the fire on four sides, otherwise the light charcoal would be scattered by the blast of the bellows. There was plenty to do for carpenters and other woodworkers, more indeed than for almost any other tradesman, as the houses were then nearly all made of wood. The yew tree was formerly very abundant. Its wood was highly valued, and used in making a great variety of articles, so that working in yew was regarded as one of the most important of trades. It required great skill and much training and practice, for yew is about the hardest and most difficult to work of all our native timber, and the cutting tools must have been particularly fine in quality. Various domestic vessels were made from it, and it was used for door posts and lintels, and other prominent parts of houses, as well as for the posts, bars, and legs of beds and couches, always carved. Yew carving accordingly gave much employment. There were also painters and metal engravers. And here it is just as well to remark once for all, that the various articles of everyday life, hats, curricks, shoes, book covers, shields, chariots, leather, and so on, were made by special tradesmen, or women, all with their several suitable tools and instruments. The makers of vessels of wood, metal, and clay were very numerous, and they were quite as skilful and dexterous as those of the present time. 1,000 years ago the Irish coopers were able to make vessels of staves bound with hoops, like our tubs and churn, as water-tight and as serviceable as those made by the best coopers of our day. The tools used by various tradesmen are often mentioned in the Brehon Laws, from which we learn that there was as great a variety in Ireland then as there is now, but our limited space will only allow us to barely mention a few. There were saws, axes, hatchets, and hammers of various shapes and sizes, and adze for coopers and shield makers, compasses for circles, planes both for flat surfaces and for moulding, lathes and potter's wheels for turning in wood and soft clay, chisels and gouges, awls and augers. Besides the common whetstone they used a circular grindstone, which was turned on an axis by a crank handle like those now in use. Numerous stone structures erected in Christian times, but before the Anglo-Norman invasion, with lime mortar, still remain all over the country, chiefly primitive churches and round towers. It is only necessary to point to the round towers to show the admirable skill and the delicate perception of gracefulness of outline possessed by the ancient Irish builders. A similar remark might be made regarding any of the ancient artificers of all kinds held a good position in society and were taken care of by the Brehon Law. Among the higher classes of craftsmen a builder of oratories or of ships was entitled to the same compensation for any injury inflicted on him in person, honour, or reputation, as the lowest rank of noble, and similar provisions are set forth in the law for craftsmen of a lower grade. No individual tradesman was permitted to practise till his work had been in the first place examined at a meeting of chiefs, and specially qualified olives, held either at Croghan or at Emain, where a number of craftsmen candidates always presented themselves. But besides this there was another precautionary regulation. In each district there was a head craftsman of each trade, designated Sai Regard, sage in handicraft. He presided over all those of his own craft in the district, and workmen who had passed the test of the examiners in Croghan or Emain had further to obtain the approval and sanction of his own head craftsman before he was permitted to follow his trade in the district. It will be seen from all this that precautions were adopted to secure competency in handicrafts, similar to those now adopted in the profession. Young persons learned trades by apprenticeship, and commonly resided during the term in the houses of their masters. They generally gave a fee, but sometimes they were taught free, or, as the law tract expresses it, for God's sake. When an apprentice paid a fee, the master was responsible for his misdeeds, otherwise not. The apprentice was bound to do all sorts of menial work, digging, reaping, feeding pigs, etc., for his master during apprenticeship. Chapter 19